I'm going to call to order the Special Committee of the Whole of the Board of Education, Township High School District 208. We have some members on Zoom, but we have members here in person. We can go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mary Ann, would you take the roll?
Here. Ms. Gaska, Ms. Ruska, Mr. Jacobs, Ms. Towner, Mr. Van Horst, Ms. Salas.
So, Mr. Fisher, you need who's on Zoom, please, so when Mary Ann took attendance?
Yep, Mr. Jacobs, Mrs. Ruska, and Mrs. Gaska.
Is Mr. Van Horst on there also?
Mr. Van Horst.
So we have 4 or 3?
4.
4.
4, yep.
Okay.
Ms. Towner, I think, is
She's on her way.
She's on her way.
No, she is.
She is on her way, so we'll speak slowly for introductions here. Like, give her a minute to come in from the parking lot. Do we have any visitor statements here today? I see a lot of administration that's come out on a Monday morning. Thank you very much. It's summer. It's Monday. It's 7:30. Who isn't happy to be here? And I want to move on to the business of the day, which is the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan for the 21-22 school year. So I know that I'll turn it over to Dr. Skinkis to introduce us, but I know the administration and the staff and the teachers and everyone involved in the community has been working very hard to get us back to a school year that is helpful and productive and connected with our students in the fall. So we wanted to hear some details about that from everyone on the administration. Thank you in advance, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Skinkis.
Thank you, President Zala. Safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan for the 21-22 school year. This will also help us meet some of our requirements for the ESSER 3 grant money that will be released from the federal government. As we all know, in May of 21, Carmen Ayala, State Superintendent of Education, made a declaration that all schools should be returning to full in-person learning at the start of the 21-22 school year. A remote instruction should only be made available for students who are not eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine and I stress the word and, are under a quarantine order by a local public health department. So we're pretty much preparing to come back full a traditional school year, traditional schedule, traditional services, as traditional as we can be. We still have 3 main open questions or key open questions: mask requirements for vaccinated versus unvaccinated, social distancing and quarantine clarifications for unvaccinated students and staff. They being the IDPH and ISB, already had sent out updated guidance in late May that anybody that was fully vaccinated did not have to quarantine. And then one of the key questions that we're waiting to get clarification on the state, we believe we can ask this, is proof of vaccination, because if we are going to have to do some contact tracing still come the fall, we will need to figure out who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated so we can determine who has to quarantine and who does not. One of the other clarifying questions we're waiting to get some clarification on is whether it's 10 days or 7 days with a negative test. As you know, the board knows, we are CLIA certified already, so we have antigen testing on site for symptomatic students, and there may be some possibility of having to do some additional testing come the fall based if the IDPH wants that. Now, we are a Tier 2 school in their funding model, and they have additional testing resources at no cost for Tier 2 schools. So in the event we do have to do some additional testing, we'll have access to that. And I know Mr. Mannon and Ms. Matana have been keeping track on that. A majority of today's presentation will be the administration speaking on 5 key sections: teaching and learning, building culture and operations, which is kind of like what will be our schedule, what will be some of our safety protocols, SEL supports, which is social emotional learning supports, extracurriculars, and then Ms. Matana will just touch on again the spending plan that she also touched on during the tentative budget process. The third slide in the presentation are some goals that Dr. Freitas had put together for the 21-22 school year. Dr. Freitas, I'll let you just touch on these.
Good morning, honorable board members. To begin with, I want to thank my building admin team who's been working hard to bring everybody back this upcoming school year. I want to thank Ms. Kylie Lindquist, Ms. Bess Augustine, Mr. Dave Mannon, Mr. Bretton Curtin, and Mr. Kevin Baldus for their relentless effort in making sure we open successfully. I'm really proud. I always feel like I have the best boss and I work with the best team in this state. So, what's really important about the goals here is that it aligns to the wishes of our community. I've spoken to students and parents at Mamma Mia. I've spoken to them during summer school, summer classes. I've spoken to them during dismissal. And what I'm hearing consistently and frequently is that they want the school open, they want kids back, full enrollment, they want them supported more emotionally and academically. They want them to be organized to help improve their their executive functioning skills so kids can engage in school and do it well. And I'm really proud that all the efforts that we're doing here really aligns to the wishes of the people that we serve. So again, I'm so proud of my team because we are listening to the community and our plan will be reflective of what's best for our students, for our families, and for the staff members here today. So goal number 1 is to effectively open school with full enrollment for in-person learning come August. Goal number 2 is every board that will have formed at least one positive connection with a trusted adult. Goal 3 is to improve our EF skills in effective planning, organization, decision-making, behavior and time management. And last but not least, really going back to our commitment to equity, something that we'll be working on throughout this year and in the next coming years, is increasing the number of students from diverse backgrounds in advanced placement courses. I know equity is important to the mission of the district and to my team when we continue moving that forward. And Dr. Skinkis then summarizes the goals of the building.
Thank you. Teaching and Learning, Ms. Lindquist, Assistant Principal for Curriculum Instruction.
And just as a question, if someone from the Zoom call raises their hand, you'll just give us a shout? Okay, great, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so the teaching and learning section of this presentation is set up just to give you an idea of where we're going and how we are going to meet and receive our students when we return in the fall. I think the Board of Education has seen some of my portion of this presentation as we presented quite a bit of the teaching and learning section to staff members before they left for the summer, because there are certain expectations embedded within our teaching and learning for next year that we wanted to give people an opportunity to work on throughout the summer and embed into their practice. So as Dr. Skinkis mentioned, the new normal is going to be in-person learning, and I think the first question that people are going to ask with regard to teaching and learning is remote going to be an option? And the answer to that is yes. Sort of, in a way, but not like what it looked like last year. A student who is unable to be vaccinated due to medical issues or whatever the case may be, who is not able to come into the building, will have an opportunity for remote learning. West 40, the intermediate service center that serves our area, along with, I knew the number of schools that we served at one point as a board member, but I don't remember exactly. I want to say maybe 41.
41, yes.
Is that what it is?
Yes.
Very good.
Somebody added on after they made the name, right?
There we
Last
go.
41.
41, yes, okay. So remote learning will be available through West 40 for students who have a health plan that requires them to have remote learning. And what West 40 is looking to do is putting together literally a remote school under an ALOT program, where they will have a director of that program, or they have teachers that are dedicated in that program to service the 41 schools in the area who have students that would need to access remote learning. So remote learning is not going to be something that students will be able to have RB teachers connected to them for remote learning. As we transition back to fully in-person learning, that's where we want the energy and the focus of our teaching staff on the in-person learning, unless a student has to quarantine. And then we are looking at how we can make live streaming of courses available to students only in the case of a quarantine. Not, I woke up this morning and I kind of have a stomach ache, so I need remote learning today, right? We're trying to really transition back to full in-person learning, and West 40 is looking to be a support to all of the area school districts in that way. So that is where that remote learning piece is going to come in if students need it. And I mentioned briefly a health plan. We've compared the process of getting a health plan that includes remote learning to applying for a 504. It's not the same. We're just talking about a very intense process where there needs to be documentation from a medical professional, where there really needs to be an examination of, is this the appropriate step to take for this student, because they truly cannot be in the building. So after we answer that question of remote learning, and I know that the Board of Education has seen this on the next slide, the idea of reframing the conversation, and I want to say it again publicly and keep saying it, this idea, there's been so much talk about learning loss and all that's been lost throughout the pandemic, and there's also been some research recently that looks at the negative impact of talking about learning loss can have on a student, specifically with their social emotional learning, right? We're talking about the fact that, oh, you're starting back and you're already at a deficit. You're already in a ground hole that you have to dig out of.
They didn't know they even were.
Right? We want to try to squash that. And so we're really talking about, and this was, I stole this from a book by Fisher and Fry with John Hattie, the idea of the rebound, with the idea of coming back from the pandemic and really looking at what happened during the pandemic, learning-wise. Where are our students comparative to where a typical student should be at the sophomore level or at the junior level? But where are the students? And then the question then after we figure out, where students are is, what do we do now for students? So the idea of learning loss, we're just kind of putting that aside. We're going to assume, we know that a lot of our students have made gains through remote learning. And so we really just want to start fresh, meet everyone where they are, and move from there. And that's what this next slide is about, the continuous improvement cycle. So when people say to me, Kylie, how are we going to instruct? How are we going to teach? How are students going to learn next year? It's going to be on a continuous improvement cycle. So we're going to receive students in the fall. We're going to collect data from them, assess them, figure out where they are. We're going to respond to what the assessment tells us. We're going to progress monitor them as they are going through instruction throughout the year, and we're going to adjust our instruction and our intervention based on the data we collect. So a continuous collection of data where we are receiving information from students and we are acting and reacting accordingly. So when you look at slide number 9, the analysis of current student performance, in order to be able to engage in that continuous improvement cycle, we need some assessments to drive that instruction. And so we have a couple of large-scale assessments that we're looking at, or assessment models that we're looking at for the fall. First, we have now been able to implement 2 years, grades 9 and grades 10, with STAR assessments. STAR assessments from Renaissance Learning we purchased last year, of course. I think it's like the great irony that I wanted STAR assessments for 5 years, and we got them, and then it was like, global pandemic. This is the worst possible time ever to implement an online assessment system. But we did implement STAR in a more limited capacity last year with our freshmen. But next year we're going to have STAR assessments in reading and in math for our freshmen and our sophomores. This has replaced NWEA MAP for educators who are more familiar with the MAP test. And there are several reasons why we chose going with that assessment that I won't get into. But the purpose of STAR is to identify those gaps in reading and math and provide teachers and our interventionists with actionable data that's going to not only direct instruction in the classroom, but that's going to direct interventions. And I'll talk about our interventions that are in place in a moment.
Quick question before you go on. Thank you. So, and it is totally ironic. I agree. So, what's being done for the rising ninth graders? So these STAR assessments were for current ninth graders rising 10, and they were selectively administered. And then what data do we have from the feeder schools in terms of the eighth grade cohorts coming in, and what, am I getting ahead in the presentation?
No,
Okay.
no, you're fine.
Okay.
We have, so at the eighth grade level, they still do NWEA MAP.
Yeah.
So we do have MAP data. It is not as robust as it has been in past years. Normally, when we would give MAP data, for example, or when we would give a MAP test, for example, if a student was absent, we would track them down. We would find them. We would be dragging them into this room and be getting them to test. So the data is there. If we don't have data on a particular student, we're in a sticky kind of spot, and that's typical for us. We've worked with Lindsay Minoff, for example, has been giving placement exams to freshmen to figure out, incoming freshmen to figure out, do they need a math intervention? Can they go up to honors geometry? So we have very similar data for incoming freshmen as we have previously, but one of the reasons why, if you notice on that last bullet of STAR, we're going to administer in the first week of school is because we want a baseline on all of our students. And so that is going to be when our incoming freshmen come in for us in that first week of school, that is going to be the best data that we can get on them because it's immediate, it's right there, and it's going to be in a format that our staff is going to understand because they will have been trained on STAR. And then it will be immediately actionable because STAR results are immediate. So we will have what we've always gotten from the feeder schools with some gaps, probably more gaps than we normally would have had because it's harder to track those kids down and get them to take the MAP if they missed it. But we will, in that first week, collect data on those 9th and 10th graders from our own systems to be able to start them with some data.
We're also taking all 2021 data like with a grain of salt, right? Because some
Yeah.
kids could have had their families sitting next
Just
to
raise your
them.
hand, Dave, let somebody finish. And then
Sitting next to them, helping them take the test if they took it remotely, right? So like some of that comes into play, and it'll be hard for the RB staff because in the elementary schools, they're like, oh yeah, that parent, sure, they are kind of like, that's them, right? And we know that kid's math score doesn't really line up with their in-person learning, what we know of their in-person learning from like the 7th grade teacher, right? So, but the RB staff doesn't know those kids.
Right, so it's clean to do it the first week.
It's clean
That makes
to do
sense.
it the first week, like Kylie said, right? We're just starting sort of with a clean slate in testing.
Dave, there's a
makes
Zoom
sense.
question. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, it's Ryan.
Good morning.
All right. You can speak if you have a question.
Go ahead.
Is it Laura or is it Ryan?
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead, Laura.
So with the STAR data, we used to get a presentation of where the school stood nationally. Will we have that as part of our presentation so we know where the district stands sometime this year?
STAR data is local data, like
Yeah,
for
STAR data is
classroom
local
and
data.
performance. They're still going to do the PSAT data, and we should have a report for that at the end of the year, in the fall. So this October, we'll see how last year's juniors did on the PSAT. We'll continue that presentation that you're used to. There's no other questions on Zoom. Kylie, go ahead and continue.
And that's the second bullet there on the large-scale assessments. We are administering a PSAT 9, a PSAT 10, and a practice SAT in the fall so that we also have the PSAT suite data because we can also, along with STAR, we can also predict or look to try to predict where a student will be falling on their SAT as well. So we want to do classroom data that's more actionable in the way of STAR, but we also want to take a look at that PSAT suite data so that we can get close to what those college readiness skills look like. So we're supporting students on the classroom level, but we're also supporting students long-term as they're moving toward that SAT in their junior year. So in the months of September and October, we're going to administer the PSAT 9 and the PSAT 10. We don't have as much freedom with when we administer PSAT data because we're working with College Board for when we get those tests and when those will be scored. That's why STAR is going to be that more immediate first jumping point so that we can dispatch interventions based on STAR and we can start to instruct based on STAR and then weave the PSAT data into that as well as a second data set.
Thank you.
So what's important with having a strong assessment system is obviously how you're going to respond to that assessment. And so through MTSS, which is a multi-tiered system of supports, we are going to take action on the data that we are collecting from students when we receive them in the fall. The supports in MTSS are divided into 3 tiers. Tier 1 supports or interventions being those things that we do for every student. Every student gets this level of support at the Tier 1 level. When you move into the Tier 2 interventions or the Tier 2 supports, that's where we're adding additional supports for students who are not responding or not growing at that Tier 1 level with just the baseline supports that everyone gets. And then as you move into the Tier 3 data or the Tier 3 interventions or supports, you are looking at your most intensive supports, students who are still struggling after everything that's been put in place at Tier 1 and Tier 2, and more than likely at the Tier 3 level, we're talking about individualized support. A student checking in and checking out with a staff member, for example, or a student's IEP team evaluating specific needs that a student might have once we get to that Tier 3 intervention. We have some additional school psych services that we have purchased to support our work in MTSS, so that Pushpa Winbush, who is kind of our resident veteran school psychologist, can work as an MTSS coordinator and work directly with me hand in hand to identify students after we analyze the data who need interventions and supports beyond that Tier 1 level, and we can begin to dispatch those supports, which is what I'm going to discuss next. So those tiered interventions or supports that we have on the next slide, slide 11, I've broken those down into what we're going to see taking place this year. And the arrows indicate that the bullets that are at the other end of the arrow are things that are new that are in place for next year. So at the Tier 1 intervention level for all students, we've retrained our staff with Rush Neurobehavioral Institute so that we can brush up on our EF curriculum. Years ago, predating me, I think it was about 10 years ago, Rush was here and RB was one of the first schools that Rush Neurobehavioral Institute partnered with to support an EF curriculum for high school students. We are still used, as we retrained, we found out Rush still uses us as their exemplar, as the first school. So RB's initial data is still in their presentation when they come out and they train people, because we really were their first partners in examining how an EF curriculum can really support high school students. So 10 years later, we're coming back to that, right? We've trained all of our staff, all of our teachers, all of our paraprofessionals, school psychs, guidance. Everyone is involved in the training to know the common executive functioning routines that are going to be expected in all classrooms to support students next year. Along with those EF routines, we have established a set of common academic routines that we expect our teachers to engage in with regard to our students each day, so that when students walk into a class, there is a routine in each classroom that feels very similar to them. That is an EF practice in and of itself, so it's an additional way that we're supporting EF, and I'm going to talk through some of those as I move on. So that's at the Tier 1 level for every student. Some new Tier 2 interventions, in addition to some of our traditional intervention courses like reading or pre-algebra, we have concentrated some FTE in interventionist capacities. So we are going to have math and reading pullouts taking place at the grade 9, 10, and 11. And we are also going to have something that has been a Tier 1 intervention, Homework Hangout, which Pushpa Winbush has kind of spearheaded and really worked actually with Dr. Smetana when Dr. Smetana was the principal to get that up and running as a space where students can go and get support. When they are doing assignments for a class or when they're working on long-term projects, or maybe when they just have a hard time going home and doing their assignments at home, there's a space here where they can stay, where National Honor Society students are there to help tutor, where we give them some snacks and we encourage them to just be here and get their work done with us so that we can support that.
Kylie?
Yeah.
There's a
Question
Okay.
on Zoom.
I can tell
was
when
gonna
there's a
let her
question
finish
because I
her
see all
Tier
of your
2.
eyes go this way.
I know. Did a nice job just raising your hand.
Who's got the hand up, Dave?
That's Ryan Fenworth, me.
Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
So on the Tier 1 supports, I'm fully on board with the rush curriculum for executive functions and then obviously the common routines. I guess I'm going to use my own experience, but how much is this going to be something that we're going to ask the teachers to develop and take ownership of in their own practices versus the common, I guess with the common routines? Is this something that we expect hard line for teachers to go step by step, or are we going to give them space, and I'm going to suggest through PLCs or other time at the beginning of the year to build something in, and how much does it need to look uniform versus they can self-report to admin and or their colleagues what they're doing so that they can share in the successes. I know I'm looking at my own practices going back into what is normal school and hoping that we provide some space for teachers to see what was working prior, but also assuming that each classroom is going to look a little different in terms of how to engage students and turn their minds on and get them into those executive functioning routines. And so I'm kind of curious just to know what language or direction is going to be given to the teachers to get them to develop practices that are best utilized among the student population and shared among the teachers themselves. So more from the professional development or institute day, I'm kind of curious to know how it will be addressed to them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So this has already been addressed to the teachers. This is something that we've talked about with the teachers in May before they left for the year, where we presented what those common, and I'll get to the common routines in a moment, but we presented the expectations for what the common routines needed to be to the teachers for that very reason. What Mr. Venhorst is speaking of, one of the things that RB teachers are very used to and that we celebrate quite a bit is the autonomy of the teacher. So everything that we're doing in terms of the common academic routines and the support for the EF, there is a little bit of standardization because there needs to be for that routine, and so that there is at least a bottom expectation, but there is also autonomy in how those expectations are carried out. And one of the things that we did, or our intention behind giving people a heads up in May, was so people could begin to have those conversations with their colleagues, with their departments about what has worked, what have I done in the past, and so they can start to brainstorm and share ideas. So taking that a little bit further and trying to create that space, and I like the language that you used there, Ryan, to create that space for teachers, we created 2 workshops for teachers. We've already had one that took place in June and one will take place in August, where any teacher who wanted to was given curriculum hours, summer curriculum hours, to come into the building with our experts, with me, with our instructional coaches. Our EF team was there to come in and begin to talk about or work on what does this look like in your classroom. Space to ask questions of people who are those EF experts. We have a great executive functioning team here in the building. And really what I noticed at that first workshop, because you don't know what it's going to look like when you start something new like that, right? it really did end up being a very collegial and collaborative conversation about what do you do in your classroom. There are math teachers there, and the foods teacher was there, and people sharing ideas about how does this work? How does this work in special education? What do students do in study skills that might support executive functioning? So it was a time for people to gather and come together and talk about what has worked for them in the past and start to look at, with the support of the EF curriculum, because it's got a wealth of ideas for lessons, start to look at what do I think this might look like in my classroom in a collaborative setting. And I believe, I want to say there were about 15 teachers that came to the first one, and I have about the same number, if not a couple more, signed up for the August workshop. Teachers could come to both. I have a couple teachers who are coming to both workshops, and like I said, it was open to everyone on the staff, and it really was just a workspace, a space to bounce ideas off one another and really talk about how is this going to look in our classroom. Because, as I mentioned, we want to set the baseline expectation, but I want your classroom to be your classroom. I taught for long enough to know that when someone tries to force a teacher in a box that doesn't fit them, their instruction becomes disingenuous. And that's not successful instruction. So to answer your question, Ryan, it really is both. It's a baseline of expectations that you'll see and I'll discuss in a moment, but it also is very much giving teachers the freedom to use a format of meeting those expectations that works for them and feels appropriate for their course, for their level, and for their student population.
I just want to add too, like that number seems low, but I think we have such a veteran staff that
Yes.
some of them just kind of need to brush up on it.
Yes.
Right, from 10 years ago. And
Absolutely.
if my math is right, it was 2010, 2011, because my older one was like
Okay.
in the pilot program.
Got it, yeah.
Kylie, you want to touch on a couple of the slides with the tiers?
Yes.
We do have another
We
question.
have one more question.
Okay.
Yeah. Can we leave the Zoom faces up there, or we want to go back to the PowerPoint?
I think
Thank-
One moment, please, I'm sorry.
I don't know if the PowerPoint's being for the live stream.
Oh,
But I
okay.
guess the live stream they can see the PowerPoint afterwards if we want to leave the Zoom.
No, it's
up.
fine. It's fine. I just was just curious, especially as we're in kind of more of a Q&A section here.
Yeah, so, okay, should be good now.
And if some of these questions are better to be held, I'm fine with that too. I guess one of the things that I'm anticipating in this return as we attempt to rebound is a lot of, I guess, struggle for teachers and students to re-engage. And this is an anticipation, we don't know. But I'm curious on the front end, how much are we going to be looking for time for teachers to meet? And I guess that's why I brought up PLCs is that an expectation that on the front end, I think it's on Thursdays, that will be the focus? Is there going to be a direction to attempt to foster open space for those teachers to communicate what their successes and failures are at the beginning so that we can really try to re-engage students in a positive manner on the front end? I'm just looking at this return and expecting that the first 2 to 4 weeks are just going to be something that's quite cumbersome, both mentally, emotionally, and then trying to re-engage academically, hoping that teachers are given the space and time and also freedom to collaborate early on.
One thing I think I've tried to establish in my 6 years here is time, freedom, and space for teachers wherever possible. And I think that we have an abundance of that, and I think a lot of that comes from kind of the established routines before I got here, but also the fact that I was an instructor for as long as I was. So when we structure things like Institute Days, you mentioned, we are very cognizant of ensuring that a large chunk of our Institute Days, typically in the afternoon, are dedicated to teachers having time with their departments to collaborate. I'm excited that next year with the new bell schedule that we'll touch on in the operations section, that our PLC time is expanded. So we have longer PLC time for our teachers to be in that collaborative space and share ideas and talk about what works. So I feel very confident that we have that time built in for teachers to collaborate and share share what works. And I also feel that we have established through the pandemic a very strong culture on our Tuesday PLCs that we did during the pandemic. We have established a very strong culture of sharing what works and just, a quick 5 minutes of here's what I'm doing in my classroom and here's how it helped me. And so we're looking to integrate that as well back into PLC. Time on, it was always an optional basis. We had really good attendance though for people who are eager to share those ideas. So we're looking to continue that. It's going to be tricky because the schedule is different. We don't have the freedom of time that we did during the pandemic, but that is something that came to be very valued in our building, and we will continue to carve out space for that as well.
Kylie, I want to make sure we get to the other, I know some board members need to sign off at 9, so can we just touch on the next a couple tiers and then.
So I have 2 slides for tier 1. I wanted to expand on those bullets that I put in. So the EF practices, I have listed the 5 EF practices that are going to be standard in our building. These are the same 5 that we did 10 years ago. Number 4, we just changed the wording on a little bit because it was long-term storage where kids were keeping folders of paper and notebooks in teachers' classrooms 10 years ago. So now we're talking about materials management and how do you manage a Google Drive so that you can actually find something that you did in there.
It's a good lesson for
AI
everybody.
search,
right?
that's how I manage
Exactly.
my drive.
So those 5 practices are the ones that we are going to be using across the building. We have, our teachers were hungry for the color coding system to come back. And I should note, all of these EF practices and the resurgence of EF at RB is a teacher-initiated action. Our EF team is comprised of people who were here 10 years ago when we were doing really strong work in EF, and people who are embedded in that understanding, like our school psychs, some of our special education teachers. So this is something that for a couple of years now has been a call from our teachers, and this is the perfect time really to bring it back when everyone is coming back, figuring out how do we do school again. I put the color codes there because you never know who's watching. This will be sent to parents and families also, but parents always want to know, if I buy school supplies, do I need, right? So I wanted to make sure the colors are there so someone who's watching this meeting can see how that color coding system works. So this is the...
And again, it tracks with the feeder schools.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the fundamental EF practices that
Yeah.
we're going to see in all of our classrooms. The next slide are those common academic routines that I mentioned. So we're asking that teachers are greeting students and receiving them. There's a lot of research that shows, especially with SEL, that just talking to a kid, hello, Ramona, how are you? You get a sense of what is going on with that kid for the day, and you can level set what's going on in the classroom. We want every teacher to have some sort of anchor, and here's really where the autonomy comes in. I've seen this done in classrooms in a variety of ways. In my classroom, I always did it as a PowerPoint slide, and I have lots of teachers who do this as a Google slide. Some teachers still write it on the board, and that's okay too. Some teachers use a page right out of Schoology, where they direct students to the objective for the day, the agenda for the day, the bell ringer, the assessment for the lesson. So there is something that anchors students in, here's where I am, here's what I'm doing, what is expected of me, and what is going to happen at the end of this. We want teachers to have a conscious wrap up. So to the degree possible, right? I know that there are some days where you are running out of your physics class with your hair on fire because the experiment went right up to the bell, and this might not be possible every day. But 160 out of 180 days, there's a conscious closing of the lesson where students understand this is the final thing that we're doing today, this is what it meant, and this is what I have to look forward to. Again, getting students into those routines of really understanding, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and here's what we're going to do next. And then some sort of exit, some sort of formative exit where you are checking in with your kids before they leave the classroom. Whether it be the classic thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. How comfortable do you feel with this concept? Or write on a Post-it note how comfortable you feel with this concept and stick it on the board as you're leaving the classroom, so that the teacher is constantly collecting feedback from students about how they are doing. Doesn't have to be a quiz, and this is again where some of that autonomy comes in. It can be in any manner manner that you want to take the temperature of your students, but as long as you are taking the temperature of your students. The name of the game this year is going to be a clear understanding of what students know and what students can do. And if we don't have those two things, we're going to be paralyzed. So we want to routinize checking in on that every day.
Homework Hangout, right?
The two Tier 2 slides deal with those Tier 2 interventions for students who might be struggling after those baseline services have been met. So a student who is failing more than one core academic course will be mandated to go to Homework Hangout. Now, I'm not going to show up at their class and drag them kicking and screaming there. I might show up and nicely encourage them to come, but mandatory to the degree to which we can make it, right? The expectation will be if you are failing more than one academic class, we have you somewhere where we are working with you to try to get that grade up, where we are in communication with teachers, where we are having some tutoring situations to really help students come out of that hole and really get ahead. And then the second, like I mentioned, we have dedicated 1.0 of our total FTE for Pullout Interventions for next year. And this is what I'm really excited about. We have some incredible interventionists who are going to help at the 9th, 10th, and 11th grade level, collecting students, bringing them in for small group instruction to repeat concepts, to reteach concepts, to give them an opportunity to work together and relearn concepts. And again, all based on that large-scale assessment data. So once we do the STAR testing in that first week of school, we are immediately going to be able to start scooping students up before they get into a situation where they're failing. And then the Homework Hangout can be something that helps them, as if they are still struggling. And then I mentioned Tier 3 academic interventions. Tier 3 is really the one-on-one level. A student who maybe is not still being successful with small group pull-out instruction, maybe needs some one-on-one tutoring, maybe needs some adjustments in their programming, maybe needs a check-in or a check-out with a staff member. So a much more individualized program at Tier 3, and that is something that is very typical for RB already. That's why it's not flagged as a new intervention. We're really looking at making more robust interventions before we get to Tier 3 so that we have fewer students who need that Tier 3 intervention, because we're addressing their needs already at Tier 1 and Tier 2. In special education, Mr. Baldus added some information in the special education section just to kind of review what has been going on with special education. Our special education department has done a phenomenal job getting students in all year last year. The students who needed to be here with IEPs were here, and they were in rooms, in pods, working together with a trusted adult, helping and supporting them. And those are the kinds of things that we want to continue creating and establishing relationships, reviewing those IEPs and the assessment data that goes along with them so that we can make adjustments as needed. Co-teaching support and professional development for co-teaching has been a big initiative for Mr. Baldus. That all happened before people left for the summer. And then we have opportunities, especially for new co-teaching pairs, to meet together and do some of that planning based on that professional development. But special education has always been the front lines of supporting things like executive functions, because that's what they do very typically. Special education students thrive with those routines, and there's a reason, because they're good practice. And so a lot of this, a lot of our EF has come from special education teachers saying, this works, we've got to do this in all of our classes, we've got to bring this back.
Thank you, Kylie. Hector, is this your slide now?
Yeah, last slide.
Okay, so addressing diversity.
Thank you very much. And I know we're kind of moving on, I want to be mindful of time, but thank you very much.
Of course.
Ms. Lindquist, yeah.
Kylie, thank you.
Addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in AP enrollment, and this is more of a long-term goal, but it's very dear to me, and it aligns with the mission of our board. So if you look at the bottom, if you look at the data, to my left, you have the percentage of AP students. This is the fall 2020-2021 school year. You have the percentage of AP students. And then on the right side, you have student enrollment by race. So for example, for last year, there were 214 Latinos in AP, which represented 31.9% of our AP students. Our overall Latino population is 37.3%. That's an opportunity to be more inclusive and include more Latinos in AP. Our Black students, we had 2.5% of AP students. Overall, our Black students were about 101, 6.1% of our total school population. Going down to our Asian Americans, we had 32, 4.8%. Enrolled in AP, and if you look at our overall Asian population, we have 66 students, 4%. So we're above kind of that threshold there. And for white students, we had 401, 59.8% enrolled in AP, and overall white students represent about 52% of our overall student population. So that's so you guys can see some data of how AP enrollment looks like at RB. To increase diversity in advanced placement courses, I will be hosting an AP Family Night in the fall, consistently analyzing, monitoring, and act on current AP data. And really where I see a lot happening is me collaborating with my admin, counselors, and staff to find opportunities for students with diverse backgrounds to engage in AP coursework. Currently, we don't have AP at the freshman level. I've been at schools where AP has been very successful at the freshman level. So there's just opportunities. Again, this is really like a multi-year vision, but going back to the board's mission, to what's dear to me, we're gonna get more students of diverse backgrounds in advanced placement.
I think you have a question, Dr. Freitas.
Go ahead with the Zoom question.
Hi, this is Tom.
Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, everyone. It's actually not about DEI. I just have two very quick comments that have to do with Kylie's presentation. And Kylie, thank you. I mean, the whole package, I think it was very thorough and appreciated. So I think this is all good. The two quick points. You started out with a question that probably the majority of community members will have, which is there a remote option? I would answer this by saying no.
Right.
However, if they're blah, 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 all the things you said, I think the danger with starting out and saying yes, but is that people might associate this with synchronous learning and, what the teachers have been doing. Since I know there's discussion about some of that maybe coming back, but I think in terms of setting the expectation, the answer should be no, there is no remote. I mean, that's my personal opinion. And the second one, a very broad one, but also related to community communications. Over this whole year and a half, I've always sort of thought like, what might be the silver lining argument of a pandemic, if such a thing even exists. And I just think if there's ever been an example, that a lived experience that makes the argument for growth as opposed to hard performance, right? The whole discussion about, is it about growth or, I don't know if there's ever gonna be a more powerful example that illustrates how not only students, but every human being throughout their lives is gonna have setbacks and spurts of growth. And if anything, I think we might wanna think about how to actually, piggyback on that and say, like, this is why the growth discussion is so important. That's all I had.
Thank you.
I'm gonna try to piggyback in there because Tom just hit on some things. So this is Ryan Van Morst again. Can I have a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
So and Tom, thank you. With the community communications, I want to emphasize that, again, I don't have a student at the high school yet, and so I'm not following those communications out quite as much as I am the D96, which is the elementary school. But heading off some of the concerns about students coming back in the classroom, and I like that Tom said that the answer about remote learning really is no, but it's also about getting people into a comfortable situation, understanding what the expectations are on wearing masks and things like that. I know we've had concerns from the community about that as well, but addressing those now in as widespread a manner as we can, giving information about, I know I've been saying this at a prior meeting, but information about where people can get more scientific information about getting vaccinated and also sharing our vaccination rates. I know is whether we can collect the data on who is vaccinated, and I understand there's going to be some issues on people's concerns, but that number one is a huge thing in communicating with the entire community about what the expectation is when we come back, so thank you for that. And then the second one, I was going to save this for discussion at the end, but because Tom just kind of mentioned something that I was thinking of, is we can go back to the 2018-2019, which was our last full school year model, or look forward, and this is an opportunity now to in what we're doing and reconnecting, but I think it's going to be very difficult that, like I said, the first 2 to 4 weeks as students try to re-engage. And so getting everyone, including, and I'm the teachers as the front line, to engage with students and create an atmosphere that really does welcome students back and creates some enthusiasm, but also an understanding that we are going to have some major fears and some people that are ready to be back and go back to what normal life was, and finding a classroom dynamic that is going to allow for everyone to quickly adjust back to a new normal and also feel as comfortable as possible. And so I guess I'm looking at this concern of both fears and also anticipation to create a collaborative environment. And so I guess I'm kind of piggybacking. There's not necessarily a question involved in there, but going off of what Tom said is communication with the community, and my fears that we're going to see a wide spectrum of people's comfort level being back. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
There's two other questions, I think.
Are there two more? If I can jump in quickly on the communication piece, I think as a board, we should be, at our July meeting, I'd like us to have a discussion about communications and how we're sharing information that this district is doing out with the community. I think there's some real opportunities to be positive and talk about the good things that are happening here that sometimes they get lost in translation through social media and other things. So I think we have an obligation, but also an opportunity to be talking about some of our communication strategy in July. So I'll put that back on Dr. Skinkis, and we can talk about this at our July meeting. Not to take away from anything else that Ryan or Tom said, but I think that's just an important piece for next steps. And were there more questions? I'm sorry.
Yes, there's
Okay.
two more. Ms. Gaska?
I have a question related to good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My question is for Dr. Freitas in relation to the AP classes. I'm wondering what barriers have been identified as to why underrepresented communities are not enrolling in these AP classes. I know that you listed on there an AP night for parents, and that leads me to believe that it's just reluctance on the part of parents to sign their students up, or is it academic barriers? And if they are academic barriers, how can we start to mitigate those barriers at the feeder schools? Because unfortunately, by the time our students get to the high school, that they may be behind academically. So sorry, that's a very multi-part question, but what barriers, if any, have been identified as to why students are not enrolling in AP classes, I guess is the real question here.
Sure, Ms. Gaska. So initially, again, this work really, has just begun in my vision for our AP program. But, I think knowing, right, information, communicating what we have, is huge. I'll be working on definitely communicating that. I think you speak to a good point, what's happening in the feeder schools. And again, another piece of my work is engaging with the middle school principals and with the staff to find, opportunities for those students as they kind of transition in high school. My presentation, will be, bilingual. I know that's, I know some of our community members, many, speak Spanish as their first language. So really creating awareness about AP in multiple languages, engaging with the feeder schools, to see what work they have that could align to our practices. But I would say those are some initial barriers that I've seen. But there's a lot more work, to be done, Ms. Gasca.
Thank you, Dr. Freitas.
Mr. Ruska, do you have a question, or is your hand left? Was your hand left up from the last question?
No, I do have a comment. So if we look at the DEI slide, I think there's some confusion there. If we just look at our Black population, we see that we have about 100 students enrolled. I think we need to probably clarify that goal. So if we have 100 Black students, we can maybe assume that there's 25 Black students in each grade, and then we're showing that out of the Black population, 17% have been enrolled in AP classes.
No, it's 2.5%.
17 students.
No, it's 2.5% out of the whole pie, but if you look at the percentage of Black students, 17% of Black students are in AP classes. And if you
That's
think
a
about
raw
it,
number,
only
not a percentage.
the way this chart is done is not clear, because if you look at the raw number, it says that the raw number is 17 students are in AP classes. If we assume that they're spread evenly, there's only 50 students that are junior, senior. That's a high number of Black students given their population. So I don't think that I know that these numbers are not correlating. And just based on raw numbers, you're never going to have an equal percentage of students in here. If we look at Asian, just look at the Native Americans, Native Hawaiian students. We have literally 3 Native American students in the school. Raw number, 2 of them are in AP classes. That's almost 100% of that population is taking AP classes. So that percentage of those Native Americans taking AP classes is higher than white or any other nationality. If you look at, the only one that kind of compares, if we look at our Latino population, we have raw numbers, 620 Latino students. We have 1/3 of our Latino students in an AP class, which is excellent, because you would assume that 300 of those students may be junior, senior, and yet almost more than half are taking AP classes, which says that maybe some sophomores are even taking AP classes. If you look again, this is a little confusing. We have 7 Native American, okay, so and our American Indian or our Hawaiian students, here's just shows you the statistics are off. We have Native Hawaiian students. We literally have 3 in the building. 2 of them are taking AP classes. So that is 66% would be out of that population are taking the AP class. That's pretty good. But out of the whole portion of who's in AP, yes, they're only 0.3. But if you do the statistics that way, when you have 3 students, they're never going to be equal, but in representation of their population, they are ahead of all the other populations.
Percentage of AP eligible.
Clearly, you guys see this.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
No,
think
absolutely.
you're absolutely correct in that percentage on the left-hand side is based on the total number enrolled in AP, but technically, even if you used 100 African-American students and 17 enrolled, 17% of our African-American students are taking.
Right.
Versus 35% of the
So Dr.
Latino and
Freitas needs
46 of the
to,
white.
if you can, just maybe, we need to probably clean up that chart a
And
little
so
bit.
then
Or add
what
a
is
third
the
column.
goal? So if we're looking at our junior, senior in the population, because freshmen, there's only a few AP classes.
Freshmen have no
I
AP
think you
classes.
want to clarify your goal and be careful with your statistics. This slide is not doing justice to what your goal is. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point.
It's a great point.
So I think the stats need to be cleaned up here and show as a percentage of eligible, is that what you're saying? As a percentage of eligible AP students?
Right.
Well, and eligible and of the population. When you have 3 students in an entire population and 2 out of 3 are in AP,
You can't get much better than that, because the assumption out of 3 students is maybe all 3 are not junior, senior. I would think you almost have 100% of eligible students. So what are we trying to say here? Are we trying to say that we want an equal percentage of eligible students per population group? If that's what we're trying to say, we definitely need new stats.
Dr. Freitas, this was your goal. What are you trying to accomplish?
The
Want some more
overall
work on that?
Yeah, of course. No, to increase representation. Overall throughout the every grade level with the population. That's really the goal.
But you're never going to have equal, Dr. Freitas, because our populations are not equal. So what we need to say is that out of every population of eligible students, what percentage of that population, so if you want a 30% or 50% of every population in AP, that's going to look different than this chart.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Because you have 50% representation in your Asian community. And I don't even know if that's, of eligible students. So I think we need to do some work on those numbers. I know we do.
We have
Okay,
another
I'm done.
question, Ms. Gaska. Thank you, Ms. Haruska.
Sorry, I was just going to add to what Laura's saying, and I agree. The stats definitely need to look a little different, only because 40% of all of the RB students are enrolled in AP, right? But yet it's close to 60% of the white students that make up that population. So while it's never going to be equal, Laura, I think it needs to be equitable. So yes, I agree. Thank you for bringing that up. If we want to play around with stats, that's like the easiest thing to do, right? Data, you can spin it in so many ways, but at the end of the day, we just need to ensure that our students are getting a fair shot at signing up for these AP classes. And again, I go back to my original point. Are they not signing up because of a lack of interest, a lack of communication to parents, or is it because they don't qualify academically? I think that also needs to be included in this outreach effort. Because if it's lack of academic preparation, then we have a bigger problem on our hands than just getting the parents to come out to an AP night. So let's really think about that.
Lorena, I'm just going to say, we got to be careful with the numbers, because there will be more white students in AP classes just because that population is so much higher. You got to look at the percentage of eligible students per population. That's where you got to find parity.
I think Dr.
Laura, except when you take the number of white students and compare it to the entire population of students that are not white, it's about 50-50. So let's make sure that it is an equitable representation, is all I'm saying. But it goes even back to, is it academic? Why are they not enrolling? And that's where I think that we could have a bigger impact, is that academic preparation that we need to ensure our students are receiving so that they can, if they so desire, sign up for these AP classes.
So what I'm hearing is we need to have a follow-up discussion on the AP class. This data needs to be revised to be perhaps more appropriate, but then we want a more robust discussion about how do we actually move the numbers once we get those baseline numbers. So I think we can put a pin in that, and we know we have to come back to that at some point. This is probably not the forum today, but I do think it's an important discussion to be had, certainly.
Thank you, Anna.
Next part of the presentation is school operations and culture and school operations, which is Mr. Mannon. Dr. Freitas, while he's coming up, I think you got some work to do with on the AP goal that you set up, right? Morning, Mr. Mannon.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So the first slide in this section is the new bell schedule that was constructed. We had this on our minds in regards to extending out periods just due to the population in our lunch in our cafeteria. So what we did was break that out. So it's a 10-period day, and then what we did was decrease the amount of students in the cafeteria from 500 to 350, which will really, do justice for us in regards to our protocols for social distancing and things like that, and open up more space in our cafeteria during lunch periods. So as students get their handbooks, at residency, in the in-person portion of residency, you'll see on the first cover as you open up the handbook, the bell schedule that'll be outlined. And so just pay attention as you go through it. On the left-hand side, it'll show the bell schedule. On the right-hand side, what your lunch looks like. It's going to take a little bit of an adjustment period for our students to look at that, talk through it with your parent, and then as you go through your first week, they're going to get acclimated to it. Just going to be a little bit of an adjustment period going from where we're at to now the 10-period day. In addition, and we'll get to some other health and safety items here, but we will increase our security staff this upcoming year, not only for just more people in the building, but also extending the hours in which we have security present. So we're going to have them in the morning and then all the way up until 10 o'clock p.m. And in regards to the bell schedule on Thursday, a late start, again, same situation as we've had previously, pre-COVID. We will have that PLC meeting, and so every Thursday will be a late start, and the schedule is outlined there.
And this represents an extended PLC time, which I think Mr. Van Hurst asked earlier and Kylie touched on. And this is something we were prepared to implement last year, and then obviously with the schedule changes and going remote first semester.
And Dr. Freitas will lead us into our diversity, equity, and inclusion slide.
So one thing, that's really important about all the work that we've been doing is in regards to equity, is that in order for us to reach excellence, and I'm paraphrasing the words of Charlotte Danielson, the creator of the model we use to evaluate education, is that equity must be part of the work if we are to be an excellent school and just an excellent educational system in the United States. So this is what we've done so far when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with Dr. Yvette Dubiel, so a leading expert in the state of Illinois, who also works at the state level, who has worked with the state representatives as far as equity. So we've done Equity 101, understanding what equity is, and we've begun to understand implicit bias. Those are two of the works that we've done so far. There's 8 other workshops scheduled that will be completed by the end of the 21-22 school year. And you could see other topics there as well. Implicit bias part 2, social construct, microaggressions, modern day racism, dimensions of the isms, and teaching and classroom assessments. So these are other trainings that we will do, that we will complete by the end of the school year, and as it relates to our work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dave, back to you.
Restorative practices, Dave?
Restorative practice is something that we, have been implementing and using in our office for several years now. In regards to switching the hat from a behavioral standpoint to more of an instructional sense, we do have a team that has been working together within the past year or so, and it's comprised of, a lot of our support staff. And so what they're going to do is look at how restorative practices look within an instructional sense inside the classroom. So they're going to be utilizing those best practices in the upcoming year as really a valuable resource for our teachers and our students going forward. Some of the sample practices that they're going to be utilizing is just, simple things, greeting students at the door. The first impression I think a student gets is the most important, especially within a year when they're coming back full time. And something that's we're going to do as well is create and transform our entryways to really a welcoming environment, not only just for students coming back from COVID, but just for everybody, regardless if they haven't been here last year or if they've been here, engaging in whatever activities or in-person learning last year. We want you here. We want you to feel welcome, and we want to make that known, that everybody is welcome regardless of where you're at, and then let's go forward together in this. And so you're going to see some of that not only in the entryways, but then also in our classroom through goal setting, norm setting, reflection, discussion about choices, things like that, and then grading practices. So, in talking with Kylie and through some of the conversations with our teaching staff last year, that first week is so critical, and so we're going to utilize that not to say what you can't do this year, but how we can help you in what you can do and what you can engage in. So these restorative, reflective conversations are going to be targeted and something that we're going to use on a frequent basis going forward.
So, Mr. Madden, quick question. I think one of Dr. Freitas's goals is an adult being in contact with everyone in the building, establishing a relationship. We've heard from Ms. Lindquist, we've heard from you, but walk me through, and I know through the ESSER funding that Dr. Smetana's worked on, we'll have additional personnel here, as you indicated, from 7 to 10, kind of acting as that. But walk me through what it really looks like for a student entering the building, because sometimes you do come in and it's a little bit cold.
Yeah.
So tell me how you envision that looking.
Sure, and
then there is a question when you're done answering that.
No, that's a great question. Working with, we met with some students second semester several times in regards to what they would like to see. And what they told us was, we want to see banners, we want to see pictures of students that look like us. We want to have affirmations of when we come in, oh, this is a welcoming environment, and then here's what I can set my goals towards. We want to see activity boards, we want to see calendars, we want to see just friendly faces, hello. So I've been working with a couple different things. We're going to unveil it here, but a lot of post-it, like banners, signage, and then staff, like just throwing staff at doors so that when students come in, they're graded like they were in person second semester, and then a little bit first semester as well. I don't know in regards to not contact tracing, the self-certification, how that process looks yet. We're still waiting on the state to provide some of that information for us. So second semester, we had every single student come in with an ID. They scanned their ID and they went forward. We're still working through that process a little bit and what that looks like. Once the state gives us that guidance, we'll go from there. So I can't tell you exactly how it's going to be from where we're at last semester to come in the fall here, but we will have some sort of process when they come in. They're going to be greeted, and then we'll go from there. Whether it's directly going to their classroom or, again, it's all based on guidance, but there's going to be ample support for students as they walk through our doors.
So if I could
There was
also
a question.
interject really quick. So the check-in, check-out is where they literally come, like if I'm struggling, I come to see Mr. Mannon at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day to not only make sure that I have like all of my academic stuff, but like how, when I leave him in the morning, he's going to be like, Mona, you are going to have a great day today. I'm confident. And, if you need something at any time during the day, come back and see me. At the end of the day, I know you had a great day. Show me your paperwork. Like that check-in, check-out thing is going to be really, those are the kids that are the ones that feel like they are falling through the cracks, and just so by the MTSS system, they're going to start really making some strong connections with the most vulnerable part of the population. So
I guess
that's really
certainly there's a
helpful.
lot, no, that's helpful, and we have a wide, and I'm sorry, Lorraine.
Sure,
I have a question.
like, yes, a
our
wide range of
population
kids.
is
Right,
diverse,
sure.
right? In all definitions of that word. So I think reaching not just the targeted population, but it sounds like we're reaching a broader swath, and including kids at this end and kids at this end, I think is going to be so incredibly important, because they all had a shared experience in 2020, which
Sure.
was not normal. It was not necessarily positive for a lot of people. So I'm sorry, Lorena, you had a question. Ms. Gaska.
Ryan.
Oh, Ryan, Mr. Van Horst.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go to the same thing that you were saying. And this is a question that I've had, and I love the idea that we are intending to have a trusted adult in the building or a trusted person in the building. One is, I know the goal is setting it that students have one trusted adult or at least one. I would love to see that goal go up to minimum 2 or 3, but that would require each teacher to be making an intentional outreach to engage students on a personal level to do those check-ins. So Mona's mentioning the same thing, that check-in, check-out, and greeting at the door. I'm curious how we're going to, and I recognize that we may not care to measure it directly, but I'm curious, is there going to be a way that we're going to try to measure whether students feel like they have that trusted adult? I'm also noticing and some of these are hitting later slides, so I'm hoping that we can front load some of these conversations and not have to spend so much time on it in the next few slides. But the monthly community building lessons, I think, are a great time for students to rotate through teachers having those lessons and feeling some trust that they can talk about topics that go outside of the typical content area, and just making sure that students have have an understanding that they aren't necessarily going to connect with every teacher, but that we are looking to get multiple avenues for potential connections to reach out when they have concerns, when they have frustrations, so that some of those restorative practices are headed off quickly with people who students trust. So when we do run into those issues where students are having trouble engaging, we know an adult in the building who's got a different kind of relationship. I know there's not necessarily an advisory period in the schedule where students have a homeroom teacher or someone that they're talking in a non-academic level with, but I think that's what we're looking to do, is create an avenue for students to have a trusted adult. And so I would want to up that goal to attempting to have students have 2 or 3 contacts, if not 3 or 4. But I'm curious if there will be any way of understanding whether students are meeting or having those trusted individuals.
Sure, Ryan. I'll make a comment on that. So, doing a pre and post assessment, right? Asking the question, do you have one trusted adult? Early in the fall when we start, and then later in the fall asking the same question, do you have a trusted adult, right? That'll allow us to measure, that goal. So that's the plan at the moment, right?
And I think that might be confusing for students. I know I wouldn't have understood what that meant as a high school student, is to say a trusted adult. So how do we communicate that to students, that they're understanding that it's someone that they feel comfortable going to talk to about something that is more along the personal or relationship end as opposed to content end of things?
In regards to like what we did in our office last year, we purchased the enhanced package of Remind, and Remind is a system that a lot of our coaches and our teachers are using just to connect with their students. And it also links up with their classroom sites too. So if they have a Schoology page, they can send a link out for students that are on remote that they were there that day or whatever. So we utilized that site for like a dean mentoring group last year. And so to answer your question, we have data in regards to like how many times those students respond to us or the frequency and how much we put out there and we just split. I think we looked at over 150 students just looking at basic data for attendance and previous data. And so then we compiled our group, and we usually do that like at our Q1. So when we say we want to link all of our students up with a trusted adult, I think along the lines of that, we have some administrative meetings here coming up this week, and where we're gonna kind of identify the route in which we go with some of that communication. But that would be one that I would suggest we use as well in regards to just coming up with a group and then having that, whoever it may be, that staff member then utilize that group. And we did that with our security team as well, not only just our dean's office and our administration. So, and it worked out that, and it goes through either their Chromebook to their email to their cell phone, wherever they have linked in to the Remind application. It's just a really good way to communicate with students. And then the parents are also linked in, as well as we had a letter that was generated. We did phone calls and said, hey, we're going to start this program with your student. I hope you don't mind, but we're going to be really forthcoming and consistent with the communication with your student so that they can be successful in the upcoming year. So that's something that I would plan on doing again as well.
Dave, do you mind going to the health and safety?
Sure.
So that I want to make sure we save enough time for Ms. Augustine before 9 o'clock when some people have to sign off. We can stay on after 9 o'clock to do some additional Q&A.
Sure. So last week, the governor extended the COVID-19 executive orders till July 24th. In that order, they outlined that districts and schools should follow the IDPH ISB guidance, which hasn't come out yet, in regards from the ISB at least. So what we're working on right now is just the IDPH phase guidance that we have. And so masks, obviously in the building right now, are required for unvaccinated staff, students, and visitors. We are fully expecting ISB to come out with something here shortly. All of this guidance may change at any moment, depending on COVID rates or where the state thinks that school districts should be at. Social distancing under the current guidance is at 3 feet, will be implemented to the greatest extent possible. Students who are vaccinated, this is really critical, do not have to quarantine. So we saw a lot of this second semester where students may have had a close contact with someone on the athletic field or even in the instructional setting, if it was less than 6 feet. And then we would have to quarantine them, which means they would miss out those opportunities, whether it's, instructional or extracurricular. So if you are vaccinated, you do not have to quarantine under the current guidance. Testing, we are a CLIA certified testing center. that was kind of something that we accomplished in short order, and we're able to turn that around with the help of our health office and our nurse. And so what that means is any student that is symptomatic that wants to come in and get a COVID antigen test, we can provide that, and it's a rapid 15-minute test that'll let that student know where they're at. So we plan on continuing that. We have enough to carry us far into first semester up until probably December, January. So we're good there. Additional testing may be required for unvaccinated students based on ISB. Again, we're waiting on some of that guidance. And vaccinations, we've hosted 2 vaccinations clinics, one through Jewel and recently last week through Cook County. The second shot for Cook County will be July 14th for those who need their second shot. They will also welcome those off the street or need to come in and walk in and get their second shot. Cook County will help them out with that on July 14th. Self-certification, again, something that we need to look at as further guidance comes through the state.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you,
Manick.
Dave. Ms. Augustine, SEL. And since this is just a committee meeting, if some board members I know had prior obligations, if you need to sign off or excuse yourself, that's fine. We could stick around and do some additional Q&A. And this meeting was recorded, so it will be on RBTV as well as the PowerPoint will be available.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm here to talk a little bit about the social emotional support that we will be providing students as we return to full in-person learning. I'll start by talking about Satchel, which will be new for this school year. Satchel is an SEL screening and assessment and intervention tool. We had an opportunity to have a demo during the spring, and we're very impressed with the company. And actually, I know that Oak Park River Forest is using this screener, and Pushpa Winbush, our school psychologist, talked to the school psych over there, and that's sort of what sparked our interest in the product. And again, we were impressed with the demo, we were impressed with the company. I gave you a little bit of information on the slide. And we will be using this as a Tier 1 intervention for all of our students, but primarily our incoming freshmen and our sophomores, because we really feel like our freshmen last year, we did not get an opportunity to know them. So getting as much information as we can about them seems pretty important. And so the next slide just gives you a little bit of a breakdown how it will be used as a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 and 3 screener. The targets are the social emotional learning targets that were designed by Castle, and that's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And all of our students will take a universal screener at the start of the year. Right now, it's kind of a work in progress where we will actually be administering this screener. Our teachers are great with allowing the social workers and the counselors going into the classroom, so I don't anticipate that this will be a problem, especially since it's all digital. They have Chromebooks or one-to-one, so it won't be very time-consuming. So all of our students will be taking this universal screener, which is quick, 20 questions. And then the other part, why this is, I think, really useful, and it's not just student data, the teachers will also be asked to provide some input on these students. Quick 5 questions, so, and this data will sync up and we'll be able to really identify who our Tier 2 and 3 students will be, which they will then go be taking a diagnostic assessment, which will be a little bit more in depth, 10 to 20 questions, and this will be quarterly. And these will help identify those students that we were mentioning during Dave's presentation, those check-in and check-out students, our most at-risk students, whether they are at risk, if they have some interventions with learning, or if they're in AP classes. These are really identifying who are our students that are at risk with social emotional concerns. And then based on these assessment results, the tiered interventions will be recommended to the students, and then they will be implemented by the student services team, and we will be monitoring them quarterly. And the interventions are fluid, so as they improve, we move them out of the interventions, and as we identify more students that need interventions, they'll flow into those interventions.
So, Ms. Augustine, quick question. This
Yeah.
might be a very naive question.
Yeah.
The Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 we're looking at for SEL interventions are not necessarily the same Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 for instructional interventions.
Correct.
Right. So we have almost like a Tier 1, 2, 3 and a Tier ABC. I just think for those kind of listening,
So if
your
you
student
think
might
of-
be identified in one group but not the other.
Right, so if you
Right.
think of this triangle with the base really being at the top, that would be Tier 1, and then if you put a line down it, you'll have academic and sort of
Yeah.
behavioral, social, emotional. Because you'll have students that need some interventions on the academic side, but don't necessarily need it behavioral or social, emotional. Then you'll have students that need some interventions on the social, emotional side, but don't need it
Right.
on the academic side. And then you'll have students that need both.
Right.
And that all falls under MTSS, though.
Correct.
Yeah,
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Just wanted to be clear on that, so thank you.
Then the next slide is, Kylie already mentioned that we have an additional school psych next year, thanks to ESSER funds. And our small team structure has been something that we've had in place for, at least 15 years. But I just wanted to point out that one way we'll utilize the new psych is we'll actually have 3 identified problem-solving teams that will meet weekly. And on that team will be 2 counselors, a social worker, and a psych, and then the deans participate. And the deans, the teams will use the data collected from Satchel and will also use attendance reports, grade reports, discipline referrals. And then these are the students that we will problem solve at that Tier 1 level who really need some additional both academic and behavioral supports. Then I just wanted to share the topics that the freshmen will receive during PE classes. The social workers and psychs did this last year during second semester. All of the freshmen received SEL lessons during their wellness class, and we're going to continue to do that this year, starting with first semester. And then I just included some of the topics that will be discussed on a monthly basis.
So Beth, we're focusing on the 9th grade first with these lessons, correct? That's just the immediate,
Right, so.
trying to help them through with the, obviously, the anxiety and just getting back to school and being back in a school setting.
Right. So we actually have a number of students already identified for this year just based on sort of lack of engagement last year. So we can already target some of our current students. But yes, the incoming freshmen are who we really need to focus on. And again, the freshmen last year received the lessons during PE classes. And then this year we're just starting with first semester. But again, the Satchel assessment will be available for all grade levels. And then the social workers and psychs and the counselors will be implementing school-wide supports throughout the school year. Again, this is Tier 1 available for all students with a suicide prevention week, kindness week, teen dating, violence and healthy relationships, an inclusion week. Then we will, mental health awareness week will be in May. And then during finals week, we'll have some mindfulness, some de-stress activities. And then we also will have quarterly parent presentations that will be available for parents to find ways to support their students who might be struggling with some social emotional health concerns. And then we also have outside supports. NAMI has been fantastic with providing us with outside resources. They also are the organization that support our Text to Talk, which is a 24-hour, 7 days a week support line for just RB students. We have our own phone number. Students can text this number whenever they're in need, if they need someone to talk to. And then we receive a report from NAMI on a quarterly basis to see how often it's being utilized. Sarah Zinn will be providing us with support next year, and we already have a scheduled, and they are the domestic violence and abuse prevention shelter, and they will be providing a presentation to our juniors and seniors in February. Pillars continues to be an excellent resource. We have a counselor here 3 days a week, and that is a grant provided by the Riverside Township, provides us with this counselor. And she will be very instrumental. She's bilingual, and she's going to be instrumental with some of our parent support groups in providing presentations in both English and in Spanish. And then I think Kristen brought this up at a previous meeting. We will have RAP services through LADSI for our most at-risk students who are not identified as IEP students. And these would be our most vulnerable at-risk students who are we're not able to make connections with and are really needing more support at home. And it will be, we utilized the support this year and realized it would be an added bonus for next year.
And so, Beth, the RAP services is real quickly for those watching. That's like having somebody reach out to the family at home, having somebody reach out at night, maybe on a weekend, even over summer break, right? Like,
correct. The idea that the student would have a continuum of services throughout summer break, throughout winter break, and exactly if the RAP worker needed to go over in the evening to meet with the parent because the parent's working during the day, just where where we're not able to make the connections and we need someone who could be out of the building and doesn't really work within those sort of set school hours. And then lastly, I think Kylie added this slide, but the restorative justice team, and I think it was also on Dave's slide as well, presentation, that they will be doing monthly lessons to build community within the classroom, and this will probably be a great opportunity for the relationship building between students and teacher.
Does anybody following on Zoom have any questions for Beth in regards to the SEL supports we're planning to implement as we return to in-person learning in August?
One moment, just wait, I'm sorry.
Please understand, it's just curiosity, and it's probably already thought of in terms of an answer. But number one, let's see, the satchel screener I think is great, and I'm glad. I don't know that much about it. I mean, other than I don't know if it's an acronym or whatever, but I'm glad to see that we're being proactive and trying to gather that data and find out who needs to be reached out to quickly. When it comes to those monthly community building lessons that were just spoken of, I'm just curious how teachers will be prepared for those to be executed. Is it by the teachers, I think I read? And is it something that is going to be given time for them to think about how to implement it, or is it something that they're reading off of? I guess I'm looking more on the buy-in aspect. And I'll say this 100%. Teachers have some ability to connect with some students and not with others, and you'll get that mix throughout the school year, throughout the day, throughout individual groups of students that you can connect with. So I'm trying to figure out how that's best going to be implemented. So, and I think this goes to what I've been asking questions on before, is this idea of how are we going to build community now that we're coming back into in person, recognizing all the struggles we've been through in the last year. I like that these activities are being put in. I just want to know what the preparation. And I'm saying this as a curiosity, but also hoping that there's a robust understanding from the teachers and how it'll be implemented.
So I'm sorry that I haven't been part of those conversations. Here comes Kylie to
Hurry.
So the way that these are set up, and this was a teacher-initiated initiative. So the restorative justice team of teachers came to us and said this is something that they really value and they feel strongly that they want to do. And we considered doing this for this year, but COVID. So the restorative justice team is going to plan the lessons themselves so that the teacher does not have an additional lesson that they need to plan. They're designed to be about 15 to 20 minutes on a rotating basis, so we're not ever taking 15 or 20 minutes from the same class period. And so the teachers will have those in advance. The restorative justice team has some summer curriculum hours that they're working on this summer. Those will go to teachers, and teachers will have the freedom then to kind of fill in with their personality, with their flair, the delivery of those lessons. Teachers who maybe don't feel as comfortable delivering a community building lesson on their own can seek support from all of the social workers, the school psychs, who are very ready and excited to support teachers in delivering these community building lessons, with the kind of understanding that teachers are learning to become more comfortable delivering that type of lesson and building those connections with kids without the additional support of a school psych or a social worker being present with them on the days when these lessons are delivered. And again, the purpose of the lesson, as it states in the slide, is really just about building connections with students and having a non-academic lesson, a time to talk about goal setting, or a time to talk about whatever is the subject of that lesson, and continually build those connections to hopefully, as you'd mentioned, Ryan, go beyond the goal of one trusted adult into maybe having some additional trusted adults as those community building lessons cycle through different periods of the day.
Good. I think we're going to see different comfort levels from each teacher and their willingness and ability to engage.
For sure, and that was something.
Outside of their content, and giving that freedom is what I would hope is let teachers, exploit what they're good at, and,
yes.
and things like that.
And that partnership was something that came out of some discussion with the instructional coaches about that very thing, right? That some teachers in some content areas, et cetera, would feel much more comfortable than others. And that's why our student services team is always at the ready and very happy to jump in and support all teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Other question, I think, Ms. Oreska?
Beth, thank you. And I'm sure you won't have an answer now, but one of the questions that are coming up, these are great resources. I'll be curious as we move forward, how are you going to be able to assess that we're actually meeting the need, that we're identifying the need and getting these resources to them, and if it's working? And so I'm sure that's going to come in the future.
Definitely. Pre and post testing for sure.
If there's no other questions for Beth, I'd like to bring up Brendan and cover extracurriculars. Dave, you could join Brendan for activities. Yeah, take off.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So what you're looking at right now is a slide that's provided by the IDPH guidance in terms of face coverings for different athletic activities, if you will. It's broken down into two groups. You have fully vaccinated and obviously not fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated student athletes, coaches, staff will not have to wear a face covering whether their sport takes place indoors or outdoors. Those that are not fully vaccinated need to wear some type of face covering while they're participating indoors. Outdoors, they are not required to wear a face covering. Screening and testing for high-risk sports is recommended if a participant is not vaccinated. It covers sports such as boys lacrosse, wrestling, football. To my knowledge, that's pretty much the limit of high-risk sports. The next slide is just another diagram that just more clearly illustrates who falls into which category. And then lastly, in terms of the summer camp update for Riverside Brookfield, we began our summer camps on June 7th. They run through the end of July. We have approximately 33 camps and just north of 1,100 campers. So all the discussion and the talk about returning to normal, I think that's pretty encouraging because I think we were sitting on about a third of that number last year this time. IHSA calendar for next year, early indications suggest that we will be in a traditional year. They have not put that on their website yet. Typically, they carry a 5-year calendar, which will touch on when each season will begin and conclude. That is not visible yet, but everything I've heard out of Bloomington indicates that August 9th, the second Monday in August, will start the traditional fall sports. So with summer camps concluding for all school members on August 1st.
Brendan, I know in that guidance from the IDPH, and that's somewhat of what we're following here because all of our, a large majority of our summer programming is all athletic related. We're still asking kids to wear their masks to and from the car,
when they report to camp.
Yep. Right? I mean,
they come in the building.
The one thing that was unclear in the IDPH guidance is whether or not we're allowed, they have to, if they're required to show proof of vaccination. And I think that's what Dave and I are still waiting on. I think that's what all schools are waiting on. Like we're getting this, you would think after 15 months and all the drama that like occurred during this pandemic that you would think they'd be a little more deliberate in trying to put out consistent and concise information, and we're kind of getting it in chunks again. So I have 1,100 campers who are saying, well, if we're vaccinated, we don't have to wear masks. Right, and then we have people that aren't vaccinated. We have people asking, well, do I need to wear it, not wear it? So these are kind of things we're still working on with the IDPH and some of our superintendent associations.
Sure, and we know that's going to take time.
Dave, there's a question.
One second, I'm sorry, just 1 second. All right, good to go.
I just wanted to chime in on that. I'm not sure what kind of data we would be collecting, and obviously there's an outcome to the data as it's collected as to who's been vaccinated, who's wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, and what we run into with regard to FERPA and HIPAA laws and things like that. But ultimately, I'm hoping that there is an understanding that if when the data is collected or not, I guess the intent of it is to have the entire community recognize the safety that's being put in our extracurriculars, and so that we can get students back into those as quickly as possible. And so certainly sports is the one that's that we're seeing with the contact issues going in, but also understanding that the different levels of people's comfort in rejoining the clubs and activities that are beyond the sports realm will require a lot of trust as to who's wearing masks or who's been vaccinated and how that works. And so, as you just said, Dr. Skinkas, I think we're definitely looking for guidance, but also understanding that as we do request that information from the community, it is for the good of the community as a whole so that we can get back to normal as quickly as possible. So I'm hoping that we do get an encouraging word to have guidance from the state, but also understanding that when we do, or if we do ask for that information, it's so that we can provide an experience that mimics a lot more of what we knew, and we can get more engagement from students.
Thank you. Dave, do you want to touch on activities?
Sure, yeah, so a lot of stuff coming up here. To start it off, I should preface this, there's a lot of information today that's been sent in regards to, Kylie's office, to Beth, to Brendan, to mine, and we're gonna put out a transition guide for parents. It'll be posted on our website, and we'll send that out to them via email. That'll break a lot of this information down per department so that all families can read through that, talk with their student in regards to, what they can expect for next year in a concise format. And so be on the lookout for that, and we're working on that here shortly. In regards to activities, August 11th, we bumped it up, so it's gonna be 9 a.m., and we're putting this letter out soon by the end of this week to our freshman families. 9 a.m. to 10:30 at the stadium. We're gonna have all of our freshmen at once. It's gonna be great to have everybody back together at once in the stadium. We're gonna kick it off the new school year here with an orientation. There's going to be an activity fair following the orientation from 10:30 to 11:30 in the main gym. Just a chance for our freshmen to be with other students, and this is guided through our student association only. So student-driven orientation, student-guided, just really to get an experience for our new freshmen coming into the building, get acclimated to what they can expect for next year. We're also working on an all-family welcome back night. We realize that some of our students, if you are a freshman last year, maybe you haven't been in our building. We want to give an opportunity for all of our families to come in, walk the building, get used to their schedule, and this is aside from the open house. So I have a Q&A session with the admin and really just an open campus to walk schedules. Activity, interest, and involvement is so critical for next year. Unplugging our students and re-engaging them in in-person activities is so vital to, I think, just good mental health and engagement as a student and their growth and development as a person. So our activity website has over 40 clubs and activity offerings. We have a survey that's live right now. So if you're interested, and it's on our activity site, in any activity for next school year, and you're a student at RB, whatever grade level you're at, click that link, provide your information, and we'll get back to you with either an email from our sponsor or just for additional information from that activity. And then the activity link, calendar link, last year we went to an all-building calendar, so our sponsors will put that information in, and then students can click that link and then view what activities are on which day. We'll also have this pretty visual in our cafeteria and then in our main entryways, as I discussed earlier today. And then also we're going to be really creative with just doing highlights of programs that we have here for students to see. And again, it goes back to just the engagement and promoting activities, and involvement for our students. So if you are looking for something to do, we have it here, and hopefully that our students and their families realize the importance of them their students getting engaged.
Ms. Oruska, you have a question?
I do. So because our incoming sophomore never had this opportunity, would we want to extend that invitation, freshman and any sophomore who's also interested to come to this? They've never had that activity, to go to the activity fair and kind of sign up like this?
The activity fair, absolutely. The orientation is going to be specific to the freshmen, but the activity fair, we can open that up for our students, and we'll create that communication, like I said, by Friday. Probably that'll go out, so thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Dave and Brendan. And last piece is Ms. Matana and the ESSER plan, which the board's seen already once in the tentative budget. We have that as a tab in the tentative budget, but we want to make sure we're communicating this as well as part of the grant requirements.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Kristen?
Yes, this is what I have provided for the board today is a draft of the ESSER 3 spending plan. As Dr. Skink has said, the board has seen this before. It's also posted on our website. And this certainly is a draft. It's going to change as additional information about the grant comes out. For example, I just received information today that there will be a separate ESSER 3 set-aside grant. There will be money set aside that the district can apply for specific to learning loss, summer school, and after school supports. What we're seeking clarification on is whether that money is additional money or if that's money that's included in the roughly $1 million that we anticipate receiving. So as Dr. Skink has said, as this is revised, we will certainly update it on that budget tab. But if you go to slide 45, you can see we've separated into 3 categories: teaching and learning, social and emotional supports, and health and safety. And a majority of the money that we will be receiving from ESSER 3 is being allocated towards teaching and learning and social and emotional supports, about almost 95%.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Are there any questions on Zoom, Dave, in regards to the spending plan? Okay, so before we open up for second visitor comments, I just want to, since this is a committee, a working committee, there's a couple follow-ups. Dave, you could flip to the Zoom view. So what I would recommend is, based on the questions asked today and some things to continue to work on, and then if we need to reconvene this committee, I'll talk with President Zala. She had to step out, but we would probably resume this. If we had another meeting, it would probably be that first week of August, last week of July, somewhere in there, in the next month. Hopefully by then. Dr. Freitas needs to revise the AP data and the plan that you plan to address, use to address that goal. Mr. Mannon will continue to follow the IDPH and ISB updates in regards to health and safety and what's required and recommended. Ms. Augustine assessing and identifying how the SELs are they using those resources and how we're going to pre-assess that and post-assess that. And then communication. Obviously, all areas need to, all these areas and all the administrators related to those areas need to work on the communication piece. I know President Zalis touched on that as a full board, but we're also trying to put more out. It seems to be like Instagram and Facebook, some of those things seem to be our fastest way to getting information and what people are checking on a regular basis and not necessarily going to the website to look for the information. So we want to make sure we're over communicating this. And I think it's important to reiterate that remote learning will not be an option unless there's an identified medical plan, and that remote option will not be provided by Riverside Brookfield High School. So I think that's important. As the state superintendent of education mentioned in her thing, the in-person or the remote option that schools have to provide is only if a student's under quarantine and can't be vaccinated. So they have to meet both variables. So I think Mr. Jacobs brought that point up, and Ms. Lindquist, if we want to maybe even make that more clear on your slide, that'd be appreciative. Are there any other comments from the board members before we adjourn, or ask if there's any additional visitor questions?
So I just, that is in, that's in line with what I'm hearing from other schools, right? That they're giving an online option or an option that is not administered by their staff. So that's what I'm hearing from other high school educators. So we're in that seems to be the way that it's going. I just want to thank all of you who worked so hard on this plan. I appreciate a student-centered, data-driven plan. I think this is a huge step forward, a great way to reset the year. I know that everyone from the people in the lunchroom to the person who unlocks the doors all the way up to Dr. Skinkis is going to do their best to bring us back to better. And I think this plan is a great guide for that. And so again, I think I just want to tell you how appreciative I am of all the hard work that I know that you've put into this, and all the lots of hours in the, making sure that this part of the organization has what they need and this part has what they need. There's a lot of moving parts here, and you've all done a great job, so thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Freitas, obviously the month of July will be implementation, final planning stages. You'll be working directly with your team, correct? And this will be, and then hopefully if we reconvene this group before the start of the school year, everything will be ready in final draft phase.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Dave, is there one more question? Go ahead, Mr. Van Hurst.
I'm just going to conclude by once again saying thank you. I think this has been a good guide in getting started and all the work that's going to come ahead. As we bring students back, we can see that collaboration and cooperation are extremely important, and it's been obvious that those who were most successful in this very strange year were those who were able to shift and communicate, collaborate, and cooperate in a productive manner. So hopefully those are lessons that we're working to give to our students as well, because they're in the midst of this as well. And thank you all for all the extremely thoughtful input that went into this presentation. That's a good guide for us to understand, and hopefully for the larger community out there to understand what we are trying to do as an entity. So thank you very much for all the work that went into this.
Thank you. Anyone ask if there's any other visitors?
This is the second opportunity for visitor statements. Are there any? If so, please come up to the table. Okay, being the lone person in the room, I will make the motion to adjourn, and I need a second from someone on Zoom. Please.
Second.
Okay, great. Ms. Gaska, I think beat him to the punch there. Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Thank
Thanks,
you, everybody.
everyone.